My name is Burdett and I'm a professor of urban studies at the London School of Economics. I run a research centre here at the LSE which looks at the relationship between urban form and society. I trained as an architect many years ago, but I've always been interested in this connection between society and design and space and architecture through a series of initiatives, and I've also been involved as an advisor to different governments, different private organisations, including the Mayor of London, over a sort of period of nearly 10 years. In 2006, after London won the Olympic bid for 2012, I was asked by the then Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, to become the chief advisor on architecture and urbanism, and those two words are important, on the London Olympic Games. And in that role of advisor on architecture and urbanism, I was tasked with taking care of helping select the architects for the different venues, establish a vision, a brief for the whole site, and most importantly, in terms of what is happening today, to make sure that all the decisions taken for the year 2012 would create the infrastructure for a real piece of city for the following 20, 30, 40 years. The Olympics in London was located in a part of the city which is in East London, the east side of London, which for the last 30, 40, 50 years has been absolutely the most deprived. So the biggest challenge was to say, if we take this site in the most difficult part of London, how can we actually invest in such a way that it benefits the whole community and not just the people who may end up living immediately there. The second biggest challenge was literally an infrastructure challenge. The site, like many of these areas, ex-railway areas, ex-gasworks, the classic post-industrial landscape, was also, and is still today, really quite difficult to get to. It is an area, as I implied, of enormous mix of different social groups, incomes and all that. So there was the issue of, if you try and make this a piece of city, who is it for, and how do you deal not just with newcomers to the areas, but also the existing community who needs support and all that. So those were the three challenges. In 2007, 2008, so 4 or 5 years before the 2012 Games, the government had already decided that there should be a group, an entity, which was going to be custodian of the future of this area. In other words, it wouldn't just end the day that the Olympic Games ended in the summer of 2012. The role of this group, the London Legacy Development Corporation, is to take responsibility for decisions for not just the Games, but also took over responsibility from the 5 different London boroughs. Normally, these boroughs don't necessarily agree what to do. So it was very efficient politically to have this agency which was responsible for the 5 boroughs. So decisions were taken at a more centralized level, and also the receipt of very substantial amounts of central government money, roughly 8 billion pounds, so roughly 9 billion euros, 10 billion euros, went to this agency and then was distributed for the different aspects of the project. So as my role was in a way mediator between mayor, central government and local authority. So if we take physical infrastructure as one of the major challenges of the Olympic site in London, let's look at the solutions. The site in 2005, which was nearly 200 hectares, that's as big as Eole in Rome, had only one point of connection. Of the first part of the major Olympics budget, in order to make a new piece of city which connected literally to its surroundings, what you had to do was actually make those connections. The second one was to do with, let's call it the social infrastructure, the difference between those people who've lived in East London for so long and how they've found it difficult in a way to adapt to the lifestyles and cost of living and everything else in the rest of London. Well, that was dealt with by thinking very carefully how the housing allocation of what was once the Olympic Village, the Athletes' Village, and then has become part of the housing stock of London. And of the 3,000 units for the athletes, 50%, a very high number, was actually then given over to what we call in the UK housing associations, which is affordable housing. There are some very clear economic indicators which literally came out a few weeks ago. The 4 or 5 boroughs where the Olympic site is were the poorest, or amongst the top poorest in the whole of the UK. One of them was the 5th poorest, and the other one was the 14th poorest, right? Across the whole of the UK. In 4 years since the Games, from number 5 to number 14, these two boroughs have moved to 104 and 50. In other words, instead of being way up at the top, they've actually improved enormously. And this is only in 4 years. Now, this means that the Olympics, and therefore central government investment, has triggered a series of other forms of investment, not just in housing, but most importantly in jobs, which have brought up the opportunities and the financial and economic welfare of the new generation of tenants in the area. So in that sense, you can say at least we're moving, things are going in the right direction in terms of access and making this place a place as opposed to a forgotten, abandoned area. And economically, from the statistics I've given you, you can see that actually there is a change in the profile of the people who are living there, and therefore East London is slowly improving, which is one of the major ambitions of the project. In terms of what were the major ingredients of the master plan and how was it conceived for its post-2012 life, I think there were 2 or 3 very simple design issues. The first was there's a lot of water, there are canals there, but they were unused. So one of the first ideas is why not create a beautiful new park? London hasn't had a new park for over 100 years, connected to the water so that you have a very enjoyable environment for families. London needs many more family homes than actually are available at the moment. So you have this very good combination and rare combination in terms of what the market provides of good housing, 50% of which is affordable, next to parks, next to water, and next to actually sports facilities. That was one of the fundamental sort of concepts of the master plan. The other thing is literally the physical connection to the surroundings, and which has been absolutely successful. You can walk around the whole area and connect. And by the way, I use the word walk. The Olympic Games in 2012 was totally car-free. You couldn't go there by car. Whoever you were, you could not go there by car. So this means that in everyone's mind, this part of London is now a place that it's completely natural that you go there by public transport. So if you live there, you take public transport to go to work and vice versa. So there's a sustainability argument here, which has also been incredibly significant. The last thing to say about the master plan is, and this is really important to an audience of developers, constructors and others, is to never think of a new development of this scale as a completely fixed idea. That whatever brilliant people came up with in 2007, 2008 was going to be exactly what gets built over the next 20 years. You have to design an infrastructure, a master plan, which is completely flexible and changes because life changes. So the key point here is that the master plan was conceived to adapt and be flexible. So many of the things we see around us, including the Olympic Village of 1960 in Rome, the Villaggio Olimpico, could never be modified in that way. They were designed in very much the sort of the modernist toast rack type of housing, which couldn't adapt to other things. So that's one of the messages for all of us to understand, particularly if Rome is bidding for the Olympics. The UK does not have a basketball tradition. Because of our very unfortunate weather, we don't have a water polo tradition. It's too cold and wet. These are Olympic sports, very important Olympic sports. So the basketball stadium, the water polo stadium, and several others were literally built as temporary structures. Interestingly for your audience, I think, the engineering of all the bridges, of which there were many, was designed in such a way that they would be very wide to deal with the hundreds of thousands of people who came in and out of the stadia, but they could be reduced significantly so that when, after the game, they were reduced down to a more manageable, normal, let's call it urban size. So this notion of adaptability, of temporary venues, and not keep things that you don't need, was really embedded in the whole approach, which goes from the design of the site, the whole site, to the design of the individual structures.